All right, everybody, welcome back again to another episode of Civil Weird. The Civil Weird podcast is, I guess, this evening this is the holiday episode. Even though we've only got a few in the can, it's coming up on the holidays, Christmas, Hanukkah, everything. So,
well, I'd say we talk about Christmas at the front at the Illinois State Military Museum, but by the time we release this, it's going to be a done deal.
Yeah, it probably will. Well, I don't know. Maybe not. This Thursday, we might get it out. So I don't know. Either way, but if you guys aren't doing anything this weekend, come on up to the Illinois State Military Museum from 4 to 9 p.m. We're going to have Christmas at the front, and we're going to have all kinds of goodies and snacks, and there's going to be stuff to drink like apple cider and coffee and hot chocolate, and we're going to have a choir, and there's Christmas lights and all kinds of festive stuff. So if you guys want to come on up and enjoy yourself. But this week,
do you want to remind people about the hours of operation up there at the museum?
Yeah, at the Illinois State Military Museum, we are open every week, unless it's a major holiday that it's on. But Tuesday through Saturday, we're open from 1 to 4:30. So if you guys would like to come on up and take a look at the collection. But yeah, this evening, we're going to get into some civil weirdness and I guess you would say our personage for the evening, because he's a personage. He's a personage and a character.
Right. Episode number 2 for him, 2, 3. Yeah. So he's official now. He's locked in, Chris. Yeah. You're a member of the club.
Yeah. So we've got Chris here. We've got Paul. We've got me, Adam. But yeah, we're going to get into our subject this evening of General Earl Van Dorn, Confederate States of America. He had a lot of nicknames, the Lothario of the Confederacy. Paul, what were any of the other ones that you might have read?
Oh, wow. I actually wasn't paying attention to nicknames. I don't have any in mind right now.
Well, I think amongst his friends, he was known as Buck on occasion.
Yeah.
The pipe layer.
The pipe layer?
The pipe layer? No.
Yeah. The guy you don't want around your old lady. But one of the quotes that I did read was that he was the scourge of ugly husbands and nervous papas. So he had a reputation that preceded him pretty much wherever he went throughout not only the Confederacy, but especially the Lower South.
I do have a really good description of Van Dorn. This was published in 1902 in a magazine called The Collector, a monthly magazine for autograph and historical collectors. And this was written.
I still get that, Paul.
You do?
Yes, I do.
It's still in publication.
There's a select number of people who still subscribe.
I've not seen it at Barnes & Noble.
Well, it's like I said, it's a select group. It still gets the collection.
It's next to Shotgun News, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Subscription by invitation.
No, but I thought this was a great description. This was written by Clement Sullivan, who was Van Dorn's aide-de-camp. Pretty much as soon as he took command of Trans-Mississippi, he appointed Sullivan his aide. But Sullivan is also a nephew of Van Dorn, so keeping it in the family.
A little
nepotiz. But here is his description of Van Dorn, which I like. I think it's probably spot on. You read it earlier, right, Chris? Pretty close, yeah. You ask for characteristics, etc. He was very handsome with brown, wavy hair and mustache, and imperial in eyes of a lively blue, sometimes overflowing with kindliness and humor, at other times fierce and menacing. His manners and his tone of voice were habitually as soft and gentle as a woman's. But when aroused, he was something like a tornado.
Ooh.
He was the most thoroughly brave man I met with during my 4 years of war, though I met and served with a good many men with high reputations for courage. He was a good linguist, sang and played, with taste and expression, was almost an artist in skill as a painter.
Oh, wow.
Almost an artist.
Yeah, I read that kind of sources.
Better than Hitler, worse than Hitler.
He could draw hands.
He could draw stick figures and was decidedly poetical, even to the romantic in his general character. There's Van Dorn. I'm going to live by that description now. That's my Van Dorn.
Yeah. And one of the, I guess it wasn't his nickname, but it was something they called him after he died, and it was a horrible rake, and it was used in more than one instance of people either repeating it or writing about it. So I have a feeling that, he pretty big asshole. I mean, if you can just label somebody as a horrible rake, I think that falls under the 19th century equivalency of an asshole.
Sure. Hey, well, what we do know about Van Dorn, and fortunately he was a very famous general of the war, so there is a lot of references on the man, but he was born in 1820, Port Gibson, which is in Claiborne County, Mississippi. 17 September, I think, is the date of birth for Van Dorn. And if you are a Civil War buff or claim to be a Civil War buff and you've not been to that area of Mississippi, you are blatantly wrong. That is like the Civil War honey hole. You have Grand Gulf, Raymond, Jackson, Big Black River, Champion Hill, Vicksburg, all in that tight little neck of the woods.
Yeah, and all relatively still untouched from its 19th century. When it looked the way it looked.
Oh yeah, it's gorgeous down there. We were talking before the show. Chris said he was last there when he was 5. So we were debating.
I barely make the cut.
We were trying to decide if he would still be considered a Civil War buff or not, based on that. So you're overdue.
Well, can I just as a disclaimer? I have visited other Civil War battlefields since then. I just have not been
to the
Vicksburg
area. Got it. Well, Paul, you're getting into where Van Dorn was born and what year and everything like that. The one of the places that I guess we need to talk about is where his father was born, being born in New Jersey, and I guess moving south and west with the emigration of a lot of people in the Northeast that were
post-revolution westward migration. Yeah, he was born he was Peter Aaron Van Dorn, born in 1773 in New Jersey. But by his early life, it was like 2021, he finds himself in Mississippi, if memory serves.
Heading down the Natchez Trace.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, if I remember right, I think he initially is in Natchez and then
correct.
Broadens out from there.
Pretty successful in his own right. I mean, Van Dorn aside, or I should say Earl aside, Peter was successful. He was a lawyer, Princeton graduate, served as a judge, a cotton planter. I mean, why else go to Mississippi if you're not also going to dabble in agriculture?
Mm-hmm.
He was a clerk with the Mississippi State House of Representatives, and he sat on the commission that helped to plat out Jackson, Mississippi.
Yeah, he was a jack of all trades and a master of many. But the thing that is, I guess, weird to me was the movement of somebody from New Jersey to there into a relative wilderness, that was up until that time recently controlled by the Spanish and the French. I think it was Spain that had most of the control there. But for him to pick up out of New Jersey and move there, that's wild. That's wild to me that he would go there. But anyway, made a go of it.
I think Pete was also in the Illuminati. It's the same as Freemasonry, right?
Yeah.
He was a Freemason. He belonged to Washington Lodge number 3. And I looked that lodge up, and it is still an active lodge in Port Gibson.
Really?
Yep.
How many did they have a membership role?
I don't know, 5, 10, 20. I didn't. I wasn't able to get into their inner sanctum and find that information.
Are any of them named Tupac or Elvis Presley?
It is Elvis's lodge as well. Yes.
Paul, if they're still active, I think you better be tread lightly on whatever accusations you might be making.
I should stop now, huh? With
probably so.
Trying to figure out the handshakes and whatnot.
Yes.
You at least won't be welcome to Port Gibson.
And who was his mom? Sophia, right? Sophia Donaldson.
Yeah, she was a Donaldson. She was the Donaldson family in their own right were extremely successful. So he was the progeny of good stock, I guess you would say.
And Earl himself was 6 of 10 children, but I think that was like 2 wives, right?
Mm-hmm.
And didn't Pete Van Dorn get remarried at one point? Yeah.
So he had half brothers, and he was extremely close to his sisters. He was he was in the very, not the very first, but he was in the first marriage, those children. And when his mother died, he was taken care of by his much older sisters. And they did everything that a mother would. So that was why after the war and after his death or murder, his sister defended him vehemently. Not even his former comrades who had something, I guess you would say a little bit disparaging about him, would she abide. She would immediately, if it was a written account from them, she would immediately attack them in the press. She wrote a book. I can't recall the title of it right offhand, but there you go. That was his family life at the point. So, yeah.
And briefly going back to his mother, Sophia, I guess the key thing with her was that her Aunt Rachel married Andrew Jackson, who is going to have some significance here.
Oh, and his future path. So at the age of 16, because of those family connections, Earl is able to secure a slot at West Point, New York, going to pursue possibly a career in the military.
Mm-hmm. And is it okay for us for me to refer to him as Earl as well, since he's not a general yet? Just a question.
I'm going to call him Earl.
I'm calling Buck.
I mean,
all right.
Call him whatever you want.
I just wanted to get the ground rules straightened out here, Jim.
I'm a first name kind of guy.
Yeah,
okay.
Right. Old Buck. And see, I'm a wonderful purveyor of nicknames. Chris got a nickname this summer. It's quiet.
We shall not repeat it.
We won't call him that, but I'm a wonderful purveyor of those, and I'm gonna call him Buck. I'm gonna call him Buck Van Dorn.
All right, Buck Van Dorn it is. Oh boy. We're going to slip up now. Now we're going to confuse ourselves on this episode. We're going to start calling names, and nobody's going to know what the hell is happening.
Who the hell is Buck?
And he was an outstanding West Point student, right? Graduates in 1842.
Yes.
Only 52 out of 56 in his class. Only. I mean, he wasn't in the bottom.
He wasn't, as James Longstreet says in Gettysburg, dead last.
Dead last. But who was he to talk? Because wasn't he like 54 out of 56? Longstreet was in the same class.
Yep.
And speaking of Longstreet, this was a class that had some key notables in it. Out of 56, we had soon to be Civil War officers, Doubleday, Longstreet, who we've mentioned, McLaws, Pope, Rosecrans, Sykes. Yep. There were some key leaders that are going to turn up as we get into the Civil War.
And if you look at the spectrum, if you will, of those in his class, it went from the shitty to the exceptional.
Ran the gamut.
And the number one, I did not write his name down, but I did read it and I did see it. The number one man in that class ended up getting cashiered from the Army of the Potomac in 1864 for being drunk at the Battle of Spotsylvania and for, at the end, going insane. They asked him to politely leave.
So Mott, was it?
I can't recall. I can't recall what his name was right offhand. But ladies and gentlemen, if you can find it out, please write us in the comments and let us know what his name was. Or we'll find it by the end of the episode.
We'll find it by the end of the episode. Yeah.
He got asked to leave because he was nuts. So,
did you look at the other half of that class who didn't make it to the Civil War?
Yeah. About
half of that class either resigned or did temporary stints in the military and went to their civilian world. But of those half of the class, like of those half, were all killed by Indians doing, Indian duty out west. So,
Satchel bones.
He graduates.
The Native Americans had a harder time taking out a Buck.
They did. There wasn't an arrow they made that could take him down.
No, sir.
So he graduates 1842, and he is sent to serve his time as a freshly minted lieutenant in the 7th United States Infantry. Mm-hmm. And if you're not familiar with the cotton balers, they have from like modern times to the War of 1812, they have a spectacular lineage for that organization. I don't know if you've looked up the 7th at all, Chris, but a very long lineage, a lot of military honors as a regiment. Yeah. And where does he end up going? He goes to, where does he go first?
I believe he goes out to the plains first.
Kansas, maybe?
Yeah, I think he goes to there, and then he goes down to Texas.
Well, at first, I'm having to rely on my notes here, gentlemen.
That's all right.
He first was on garrison duty at Fort Pike, Louisiana, from 1842 to 1843. Then bounced over to Fort Morgan, outside of Mobile, Alabama. Then he went to the Mount Vernon Arsenal in Alabama. Then to Pensacola. And this was all in a 2-year period, from 42 to 44.
So he was traveling 98% of the time.
Yes.
Oh, sounds like
bouncing around the Gulf.
Sounds like that hot potato no one wants. So they keep kicking him out of their organizations and sending him somewhere else.
We're going to get to the reason why.
Trying to flush that turd that just won't go down.
I have a feeling oh, man. Come on, Buck.
And then after that, war with Mexico.
Yeah. War is declared.
Went to Texas in 45. So he was sort of on the border,
close to the fight.
Right before the war started.
Do you guys know what regiment was he in when he was in Texas?
Still the 7th.
It was the 7th.
So yeah, he was with the 7th. So anyway, go ahead, Paul. What do you got?
What do I have?
Yeah.
Well, I do know that moving forward in his career, now that we move into the Mexican War, all of his real promotions were brevets for doing historic stuff, or heroic stuff.
Sure.
Yeah, not necessarily because of his
acumen
skill
as an
and his
officer.
acumen as an officer.
Yeah, I would figure that from what you read about him in his exploits on a battlefield, he took to a battlefield or combat like a duck to water. So I would say brevet promotions were probably the order of the day for some guy like old Bucky Van Dorn. See, now I'm going even further. I'm
Bucky Van Dorn.
Bucky, oh boy, I'm already lost.
So yeah, like you said, he was. There was no shortage of guts from Earl Van Dorn.
May I read from my primary source here?
Hit me, baby.
So for those of you who don't subscribe, if you can get a subscription card, please subscribe to Confederate Veteran Magazine. All right, the one I'm looking at now was published in 1911, and it gives a little discourse of Earl Van Dorn's life. But here, when he's in Mexico, it says here, the first daring act of this young officer occurred at Fort Brown, which was under siege. The United States flag had been shot down. The pole being some distance outside the fort, the commanding officer called for volunteers to rehoist the flag. Lieutenant Van Dorn promptly answered the call, and with the aid of a soldier, went out, and while shot and shell tore the ground under his feet, he raised the flag,
Huzzah!
Threw it to the breeze, and amid the huzzahs of his comrades, returned as by miracle safety within the fort. His military bearing, fearlessness, and fine horsemanship placed him on the staffs of several general officers, and he rode into the city of Mexico with General Scott.
Oh,
so flowery. I love Confederate.
Right?
Confederate veteran is so unbiased that it really, that's where I pull most of my sources from.
Fair and balanced.
Yeah, fair and balanced.
I think it's funny that he was, when he would recount that story of getting up on top of there, that, he basically said that the balls were flying around him like so many hummingbirds and bees, and he was moving to and fro, trying to get out of the way. But as I've read, he couldn't duck them all. And I think it was a tiny piece of shell that hit him in the ankle, foot. But, it was a hell of a story to be able to tell the ladies, and he told it often.
And to be honest, though, Fort Brown aside, definitely some heroism, some courage to do that. But he did have, I would say, an exhausting Mexican War career. He was in multiple engagements during that war. Monterrey, Siege of Veracruz, Where else was he? Cerro Gordo,
Churubusco.
Contreras, Churubusco. It is fun to say. He was wounded twice in September 1847 alone. Minor wounds, but he was wounded twice towards the end. Yeah.
Still, he was storming the Berlin Gate.
Yeah. Yeah, he was in the thick wherever he possibly could be. I mean, the guy, you know, he loved the smell of battle, I guess.
Well, I mean, the smell of black powder is romantic. It is intoxicating. Can you blame him? Can you blame him for chasing that smell?
No. It's almost like bacon, but better.
Oh, it's bacon. If you could put those two smells in a single bottle and market it.
That's exactly right.
That's why they joined.
Mm-hmm. Yep, the smell of gunpowder in my nose.
And glory.
In glory. Glory. And when you blow your nose after a long battle, it's just black like my soul. Anyway, man survives the war. He gets 2 brevets in the war.
Yeah, 2.
Yeah, gets his first lieutenant and then his captain brevet. Yep. Then we see him down in the Seminole War, 1849, Second Seminole War.
Yeah, number 2. The second attempt to try to crush the Seminole, which failed as well. But yeah, I can only see Van Dorn in a wooden dugout canoe with a few other officers and a few other enlisted men.
Oh, that's a painting above my mantle.
Right? Don Troiani. But yeah, I mean,
Buck in the Swamp.
Buck in the Swamp.
Nice. That sounds like a good band name.
Something happens in 55. Oh, he changes organization. So up until this time, he spent his entire career with the 7th United States Infantry. Mm-hmm. But then because of the issues they were having out west, Indian attacks, Mormon fears, shall I say, in Utah, trying to protect the trails of migrants going west, the United States decided it was time to stand up some additional support for the military. So it grew in the early to mid 1850s. And that's where we're going to now see the creation of the 1st and 2nd United States Cavalry, United States Dragoons form. And Van Dorn is in the 2nd U.S. Cavalry by like March of 1855, ends up getting stationed out in Texas.
I think by this time he's been promoted to captain.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
By this, was that during the Mexican War, or was he? Because he ends up getting another brevet with the 2nd as a major, right?
I think actually during the Mexican War, he actually got a brevet promotion to major, but then of course that all goes away after
when you get back into the States. Sure,
not for Custer.
Only in his own mind.
I think he was promoted captain when he joined the 2nd.
Okay.
Well, I guess
promotion was not fast in those days by any means. I mean, even if you were an excellent officer,
sure, and he probably was not. And the funny thing is that he was in so much combat that you would think that those brevets would, they'd stick. I understand that you can't have them, that you don't get to keep them, but it would make you rise a little bit faster in a peacetime army once they had seen what you could do, on a battlefield. Nope, it didn't matter. Nobody cared. They went away, and you went straight back to being a 2nd lieutenant or 1st lieutenant or whatever shit rank you were.
And never promoted. And never promoted again until there's another war.
Until somebody finally fucking remembers you.
Right.
And thank you for your service.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Here's your gold watch.
Exactly.
No, I mean, really, if you look at Van Dorn's life, though, up until this time, he's had a lot of interactions with notables. We already talked briefly about his West Point class. He served on several staffs to include Winfield Scott himself in the Mexican War. Mm-hmm. But in the 2nd Cavalry, he's also meeting Albert Sidney Johnson, Robert E. Lee, Hood. There were some notables alone just in that one regiment out west.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm
sorry, I left out one that he would have met out there. It's your favorite.
Who?
George H. Thomas.
I
almost completely forgot that one, man. I mean,
Pap Thomas.
Yeah. I almost forgot about him.
Pap.
And I do need to do a tie-in right now for a future episode we're contemplating. So a couple of the companies of the second were put on a very unusual mission in 1858 in Texas, Camp Verde, Texas. One of those companies, they were asked to babysit camels as part of a military camel experiment in the United States. So we won't get into that now. But I think Van Dorn, being that was soldiers from his own regiment, he probably would have been familiar with that experiment that was going on in Texas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
One of his future die-hard backers, Jefferson Davis.
Oh yeah, big time. Big time. They were in a camel mood. Well. So I wonder if there wasn't a Civil War, if Jefferson Davis would have put like Van Dorn in charge of camels.
Right?
That'd be pretty cool. Yeah.
There's a few things that if you look at the pre-war out on the plains, the Mormon War, Texas, Mexico, if just one or two or three things had happened differently, the Civil War probably would not have happened. I mean, it would have happened later. Let's put it that way. It would have gone down, but it wouldn't have happened the way
slowed it down for a few years, right?
But those guys, once they lived through combat the first time, they figured, well, shit.
Well, if only that Camel Corps had proven a better glue to hold the
the country together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
oh boy.
But anyway, that's
for a later thing. Yeah. But as we know now, he's fighting Comanches at one point, I think, out west. Wounded twice with arrows, or at least at one time he took a couple of arrows.
Yeah, in the wrist and in the chest.
I think in the same fight.
Yeah. I'll quote my primary source again, going back to Confederate Veteran magazine. Yeah, twice Major Van Dorn was severely wounded with arrows, which he pulled from his body. I don't know. Maybe. The blood flowing like wine from a drunkard's tankard.
Ooh. That is poetry in motion. From what I read, he was in that fight. He was out in the middle of nowhere and had no surgeon. And of course, the units didn't have medics at the time. And so he decided, in order to get back to where he needed to be to get the wounds looked at, he pushed the arrows through to the other side to get them out. I know that we've all seen it in movies. We've never seen it in person, thankfully.
I did it once with a fish hook. Does that count?
Yeah, it's barbed. It's kind of the same thing, but on a much, much smaller scale. But I cannot imagine being getting shot just with arrow shot, but then B, having to push what just shot me deeper into where it is and not know where it's really going to go, because it's a chest wound. You don't know where that thing is. It could be in your lung, and it could be literally about to scrape your heart, and you're just going to fall over and die. But he did it because he was Buck Van Dorn.
And John Wayne can do it. Buck Van Dorn.
Everyone can do it. Everyone can do it. Yeah.
Right.
Everyone can do it.
Exactly right. But there's no, and again, we'll bring it back to it. There was no shortage of guts for Earl Van Dorn. So, but that was never his problem.
And the other remarkable thing about that too is that, they initially didn't expect him to live, and then within 5 weeks, Buck is up and
around.
Back in the saddle. And I guess, maybe at this point he's in Indian territory. He's down in Texas. It's kind of an open range situation there. And I guess maybe we should talk about, what Van Dorn is beginning to really be known for. So, yeah, I guess at this point, we're going to get to one of the main or possibly main reasons why old Earl, air quotes, Buck Van Dorn, ended up with a bullet in his head. What's that, Chris?
I said
He ruined it.
Yeah.
I was going to say there wasn't a projectile made that could take him down.
So there you go, everybody. I've ruined the podcast again. But
Let's wrap it up.
Wrap it up. Let's go. Let's just shut it down. But yeah, he's out in Texas, and while he's out in Texas, he has a wife. And has, I think, at this point, 2 children. But General Van Dorn, not at this point, but Earl at this point, is about to do what he is wont to do with the ladies that are in his arena of, I guess you would say, breathing or eyesight or anything else.
The room temperature challenge.
Exactly right. He takes up with a laundress, his laundress in Texas, and ends up having 3 illegitimate children with her. All the while still married to his 16-year-old bride.
Who is not 16? Still 16 at this time.
Okay, fine. She was probably 22. But he did marry her when she was 16, the year after he graduated from the Point. And she never went with him anywhere. They never had a home. They never had a permanent home together.
Caroline herself, she came from a pretty good family as well, of landowners.
Yeah. Alabama planter family. So they met when Earl was bouncing around between garrisons on the Gulf Coast. And her parents apparently wanted to keep her close to home, which I guess when you consider, the life of an army wife, particularly in those days, it was not exactly a fun time if you were traveling with your husband between his different postings.
Well, you had the worst you had the worst of 2 evils. You either didn't travel with your husband and stayed at home and you didn't have your husband, or you moved to some pretty horrible locations on the frontier.
Yeah. Horrible locations. And then you get Grant syndrome.
Right. Well, yes, with a lot of these Army officers, there's a couple of, when you're separated from your spouse, there's a couple different avenues you can take. Grant, he took to drinking too much.
Sure.
Buck Van Dorn, he took another route, obviously, with this Martha Goodbread in Texas.
Say it again, Chris. What was her name?
Martha Goodbread.
What a great name. Goodbread.
Goodbread. Goodbread.
Good bread.
It sells itself, actually.
Right. It does. It absolutely does. I bet her bread was amazing. Wonder bread, if you will. Obviously good enough for 3 tries, at least.
Well, yes. Between 1857 and 1860, he had 2 sons and 1 daughter.
Wow.
With Martha.
Wow. All the while having 2... I guess you would say non-illegitimate children.
Legitimate children.
Legitimate. There we go.
Legitimate.
That's right. That's the other part of it. With his wife back in Mississippi. But yeah, there you go. It's beginning. It had already begun, but it's beginning to get bad at this point with his addiction.
And maybe you two can answer the question. Do we have any information on previous situations prior to that?
I do not know.
It all goes back to what was written about him after his death from guys who knew him that said, pretty much wherever he was throughout his entire life, that was what he was about. I cannot recall the exact quote, but it said that something was lifted and many a skirt was lifted as well for Van Dorn. So, we also have to talk about what a good looking guy he was. I mean, he was written about quite a bit, and I mean, he was a good looking dude. He had, wavy brown hair. He had flashing eyes. He had,
do I need to read Sullivan again? Or
no. But
yes, Paul.
Exactly right. I mean, we have to bring it back to that. I mean, this guy was a baller. Every place that he went, he had no problems doing what he liked to do. And the funny thing is that, and I am not saying anything derogatory about short people, but that was another thing that was written about Van Dorn quite a bit, is that they called him the diminutive gentleman or the diminutive general. He was rather short.
So he had to make up for it with his stamina.
Hey, the guy apparently, he did what he did he while he could. So, and only being, I think he was 5'2". So there you go. But hey, short people, there's no hate here. No, I'm not saying that at all.
Well, let's move into, I guess we're creeping on the...
Paul's like, I'm done with this.
I'm done with this. Let's move on.
Bullshit. The short, fucking good-looking dude. Let's move on.
Yeah, short, good-looking dude. Something I'm not.
Yeah, they've all they've had so many problems throughout the years.
Just a little bit.
Right.
She never divorced him, so she must have been pretty trusting. Oh, it's fine. It's fine. Just rumors. But we're creeping closer to a lot of sectional tensions here in the U.S.
Yeah.
So Civil War breaks out, and Earl Van Dorn, being the Mississippi man that he is, resigns his commission, like many, many other officers in the 2nd Cavalry, like many of his West Point class were wanting to do at the beginning of the war. They're resigning their commissions, and Van Dorn's commission is officially accepted by the United States 31 January 1861.
Yeah. And he is, at this point, he's still in Texas, and he resigns his commission, and he basically goes east. And that's when he runs back into Mississippi, and he becomes the the overall commander of the Mississippi State Militia?
Mississippi Militia. Yeah. Backfills Jefferson Davis.
Yep, exactly.
Very briefly was the commander before he was named as president.
Sure. And I think that was one of the reasons why Jefferson Davis wrote a letter that basically said, I will be the president, but if for any reason you need me to fulfill a military role, I will gladly resign and take up that mantle. So it seems to me that Jefferson Davis from Jump Street did not want to be president of the Confederacy. Anyway, that's another episode. So
with Van Dorn being named Brigadier General, basically second in command of the militia, though, don't you think that it, regardless of his whatever personal failings we've heard of and we'll learn more of, I mean, I assume that gives some indication that he was probably fairly highly regarded within the state, or do you think it was? I think it was just more
contact driven, connection driven.
I don't know. I mean, if you look at a lot of the promotions of commissioned officers in the Confederate States Army at the beginning, there is a lot of not nepotism. Well, I mean, yes, there is a lot of nepotism, but there's also a lot of the good old boy system in how a lot of these guys get their commissions. He was friends with Jefferson Davis. His father was an influential member of the state of Mississippi for a long time. They had a lot of money, and they had a lot of stake in that state as far as property and in land and in human chattel and slaves. And so he came back to Mississippi and took up that, I guess you would say, commission. And then we get to, where he, I guess, moves forward at that point, but all of his moves at that forward point or beginning point are because of people he knows.
It may have been needs-based, though, too. When the Confederacy began their run south, you're now looking for leadership, and you're going to look for anyone with a West Point education, no matter where you ranked. For one, you're looking for those officers who already have experience fighting.
Mm-hmm. And he clearly had
a lot of combat experience. Absolutely. Yeah. Didn't have much. I mean, other than he wouldn't have had anything higher than company command experience by this time. He didn't get promoted to major until 1860. So it's not like he led an entire regiment, a brigade, a division, etc. So I think at this time they're looking for anyone who had the contacts, had combat experience, had already served in the military for a number of years, a West Point graduate. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's find what we can muster right now to fill these vacancies.
But it always seems to me, I mean, and I go, this is just my opinion, but it seems that the reason why some of them were chosen for whatever command they were chosen for was because of somebody in the Confederate government or upper echelon of command seeing them fight. Hood was a phenomenal combat leader on the field with his men in a small role. He should have never have been given the overall command of a corps or a division or a brigade. His command of Texas regiments and where they were at and what they did, they were bloodied and bloodied who they fought. But the same thing goes for Van Dorn, is that his friends saw him fight. And so therefore that translates to, I can command. And there seemed to be a lot of that. And I guess that's neither here nor there.
It's north or south, to be honest with that.
Exactly, yeah. Right. But it seems like that was the overarching reason for somebody to get a command at the beginning of the war.
And heroics don't always equate. Very seldom do they equate to organizational skills when it comes to running a military force or an operation.
Yeah. And also, I guess it's to keep things in perspective. At this point, even Robert E. Lee, I think the largest unit he ever personally commanded was just a regiment.
Well, regiment, right? The 2nd Cavalry would have been his largest echelon.
Yeah. So,
yeah. But anyway, so we're getting to where is he at now?
He only holds that role for about a month. By March, he accepts an official commission with the Confederate States of America as a colonel, and that's when he's sent to Texas.
Actual official CSA.
Yes,
like the Confederate States.
A federal recognition, as it were, a federalization, if they wanted to call it that. So he's only the Brigadier General of Mississippi Militia for like a month, February, March. And then he's sent down to Texas to take command of a brigade, to recruit and build a brigade-level command in Texas.
Okay.
And root out any of those remaining Yankees.
Whoa! Root them out, he did.
The 6 or 7 that are left.
What was the vessel that he helped capture? The Star of the West, yes.
Yep, exactly.
Without a shot fired.
Yep, the Star of the West, which would gain infamy at the Battle of Fort Sumter in a few months, and he would play a part in that. So where were we at, Paul? He's going to Galveston, right?
Yeah, we already talked about Mississippi briefly, but then he accepts a colonelcy with the Confederate States of America, and he's sent to Texas to raise a brigade. He's still an infantry officer at this time, sent down to raise a brigade with hopes of cleaning out any of the last Union forces there.
Okay.
And as part of that, he goes to Galveston, and he manages to capture 3 Union vessels that are there in harbor.
3 whole vessels?
Nonetheless,
without a shot being fired, apparently. That's a win-win, right?
This is early in the war, and I would say that Buck is off to a great start.
Chivalry is not dead at this point.
Right.
Well, it's easy to put together a brigade in 1861 because the soldiers don't know what you're doing, so it's okay if you don't know what you're doing because they don't know the difference anyway.
Yeah. It's pretty much follow what you're doing.
Well, his brief but sterling exploits in Texas, and obviously it attracts the attention of the authorities in Richmond, and they then summon him to Virginia to be placed in command of the cavalry.
Confederate regular cavalry.
Yes, yeah.
The regulars, wow.
That's first,
late April
1861.
Yep.
Yeah. So Buck's traveling again. This time he's going to the big show.
So, and in contrast to his pre-war career, he's going from colonel of a cavalry regiment in April to brigadier general in June and major general in September 1861. And correct me if I'm wrong, but does he not have the most? He was the most senior major general in the, or perhaps
at that time. At that time,
maybe that's when he becomes the most senior major general in the Western Theater.
Yeah, I think he was. But I mean, I think he got his commission before anybody else, and I think that might have been due to his relationship with Jefferson Davis,
contacts, history, all of that. Yeah.
Or I would like to say due to his career and his sterling character.
I would say it's probably connections, but
no, ends up in divisional command though pretty quickly. Really? In the Confederate Army at that time, the Confederate Army of the Potomac, and he misses Bull Run though.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he was still in Texas before he's ordered there. Bull Run would have already taken place, or am I off a month? He missed Bull Run either way.
Yeah, he wasn't there. No, he was definitely not there. But very quickly he does what he's doing there, and then he goes west.
Well, he serves in the Mississippi Militia as the Brigadier General, the man in charge of Mississippi forces.
Okay.
He only does that for a very short time before he accepts a commission as a colonel with the official now United States, Confederate States of America, if that's what we want to call them, I guess.
Yeah.
And he is sent to Texas to raise a brigade of infantry in Texas to start to secure that state.
Yeah. So he's back in Texas doing his thing. I don't know if he ran into any of his lovely ladies while he was there, but I have a feeling that he wasn't without. But yeah, he's back in Texas, and that's where he makes a name for himself in the CSA. Chris, what do you got?
Yeah, and by April 11th, he's ordered to start to round up and arrest, detain any U.S. troops in the state who are refusing to join the Confederacy.
Mm-hmm. Again, Chris, what was it?
And he also makes a brief soiree into Galveston, captures 3 Union vessels, which obviously adds to the luster of his name.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that in amongst all these exploits, he had a chance to visit his second unofficial wife, Martha Goodbread. But I digress. Let's move on with his military career. So
he does collect quite a few prisoners early Texas after the fall of Sumter. 400 or 500 Union soldiers are captured peaceably without firing a shot while they're down there in Texas. And that definitely catches the eye of senior leadership in the Confederate Army. He's in Texas for a good chunk of 1861. In September, he's ordered to go to Richmond to accept a major general position, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He accepts that September 19th, 1861. He's given a divisional command in the Confederate Army of the Potomac. But by this time, this is post Bull Run, so we do know that Van Dorn misses Bull Run. This is a time of reorganization for the Confederate forces. And really, just as soon as he is sent to Richmond, he's now getting sent by January of 1862 to take command of all forces in the Trans-Mississippi Theater.
Yeah, he's leaving, I guess you would say, everything that he had pulled together in the West. He now is making the big time, if you would say.
Well, I think the big reason why he's sent there is there were 2 officers out there who were the best of friends, Sterling Price and Ben McCulloch. These guys got along so well. Yep. And he was sent out there to make sure that friendship remained strong.
Tight.
No.
Yes, Paul, that's one interpretation.
Yeah, that's one. I read that in Confederate Veteran magazine, so it has to be right. They were solid friends. No. They were bitter rivals, and so one reason why it appears as if Van Dorn was sent out there to take command is to tie those officers together and hopefully get some unity of force going in that part of the war. And by this time, the Confederates have already been really clean swept out of Missouri. This was their last hope to tie those forces together, to reunite that army, and perhaps move back into Missouri. Van Dorn, when he gets out there in January, already has his eyes set on St. Louis.
Yeah.
That was his big plan. Right when he got there, he wanted to go off running.
Yeah. He sent a letter to his wife. Clarification, his real wife.
Not Wonder Bread.
Yes, he had grand expectations, and they said, on to St. Louis, and huzzah.
And huzzah.
Yeah, absolutely
right. I don't know if it worked so well for him. I think he had his plan. He knew what his objective was. He had an objective, but he takes off running quick.
Yeah.
Real quick. I don't know if he really took the time to do some real analysis of the forces that remained in Arkansas at that time to figure out where they stood logistically, to see if they needed to recruit more. I don't think any of that was done. What do you guys think?
No, it was the, as Public Enemy says, 100 miles and running. He literally was on the ground and was, there were two things you could never say about old Bucky Van Dorn, was that he took his time in war or in romance, and he never turned down a drink. that's an absolute fact.
I consider the man just a vigorous personality in the saddle and out of it.
Well, this is the time. January of 1862 is the time where he orders the famous Van Dorn battle flag to start being made for the Confederate forces in the Trans-Mississippi Depot. If you're not familiar with that flag, it has a red field with a white crescent and 13 white stars. And if you simply Google Van Dorn flag, there's quite a few original examples out there of flags that have survived since the Civil War.
Yeah,
pretty interesting design. I like the design. I really do, especially when you have your campaign, your battles painted on it. Really, it's a pretty neat flag.
It's one of the surviving examples of that flag is at the museum at Corinth, and it's awesome. It is one of the most unique battle flags that was produced either side. What do you got, Chris?
Oh, I wanted, just as an example of Van Dorn's belief in the power of positive thinking. This is February 24th, 1862. And he, this is one of his earlier, amongst his earlier correspondence he sends out after taking command in the Trans-Mississippi West. Where he says, Price and McCullough are concentrated at Cross Hollow, 12 miles from the enemy's advance, on Sugar Creek near Missouri line. Whole force of the enemy from 35,000 to 40,000. Ours about 20,000. Should Pike be able to join, our forces will be about 26,000. If I leave this evening to go to the army, it will give battle. Of course, if it does not take place before I arrive, I have no doubt of the result. If I succeed, I shall push on. So he's apparently he does have some numbers, and he's basically admitting that he's nearly outnumbered 2-1, but he shall push on.
Yeah.
And he has no doubt of the result.
Yeah, no doubt of the result.
Right.
No count of ammunition, missing footwear.
Yeah.
Unknown amount of sustenance, food supplies.
Paul, you're showing your engineer background.
Oh, I thought that was
engineer logistics.
What are we talking
about? Logistics.
I thought that was common sense.
Yeah, I would go with that.
As early as the art of war.
Yeah. Just absolutely as a soldier stepping off from anywhere. Make sure you have things to sustain you in the field.
Simple things, food.
But like you said, Chris, it literally the power of positive thinking. He was going to will rations to his troops.
And he takes off running towards Missouri doesn't even take his baggage wagons. He cuts it down significantly, which in some campaigns were beneficial. Sherman is a fine example of that, cutting down your baggage trains. But he had a for sure sustainment plan. This is the early spring in northern Arkansas and Missouri. What are you sustaining on? Fields aren't in.
Yeah.
There aren't very many farms in that neck of the woods at this time.
Stubble. Yeah, apparently
And
if they
honestly, late winter.
Late winter, where
he
they're
wanted his men to apparently eat stubble from February to April.
A bread basket, this is not.
No.
absolutely not at this time, and in the winter.
Yeah, and extremely sparsely populated.
And of course, that all plays into it. So he takes off running late February.
Which I understand. I get what he's trying to do. I mean, he wasn't trying to do anything different that Burnside wasn't going to try later on in the year.
That's a great comparison.
I know, right? I mean, if you want to look at it in the same vein, that's exactly what he was trying to do. He was just trying to do it before Burnside did it in December of that year, and he failed. And much the same as Burnside did. He decided to move his army without the proper logistics, and he got what he got. He got the Mud March, and then he got his army dashed against the rocks at Marie's Heights. So, I mean,
this was a mud march too. Those roads could not have been healthy that time of year.
No, and that's exactly right. I mean, they were going into North Arkansas, southwestern Missouri, where at the time it was a relative wilderness. I mean, the fact that the guerrillas of the area could literally move with impunity wherever they wanted to. And armies had a hard time moving because of their largesse. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
And I know as Van Dorn's armies, as that army got closer to the forces of Curtis, they were throwing logs across roads as well to really hamper their movements as they were progressing north.
Yeah, I mean, and Curtis was outnumbered 2-1 at the moving into the fighting at Elkhorn Tavern or Pea Ridge. He knew what he had to do, which was slow down an aggressive enemy like Van Dorn. And Van Dorn was not only being aggressive, he was being hyper aggressive. He was using his army as a battering ram to move into, I guess you would say, enemy territory and try to take it back. And his scouting parties were Indians, American Indians that literally did a good job, and they did what they did when they got into combat. They started to take scalps. And that's where we get to, we fall into Pea Ridge. And that's exactly what he did. He, I would say, stumbled into Pea Ridge more than fell into it. But yeah.
I think the most embarrassing thing of Pea Ridge from a Confederate standpoint is this was one of the very, 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 very few engagements where the Confederates outnumbered the Federals.
Yeah.
And
2-1.
to let that,
absolutely. And that's the thing. It's not just the fact that they outnumbered them, but the margin by which they outnumbered them.
Yes. And training wise, the Confederate force was much better trained than Curtis's men.
Yeah, because most of those men, aside from Pike's contingent, from the Indian country, had already been through Wilson's Creek.
Veterans. Absolutely.
At this stage in the war, they very much were.
Well, I mean, soldiers of France Eagle as well. I mean, they would have been veterans.
Sure.
Well trained as well. Yeah.
But
I give more faith to the soldiers than to their particular general. But
you don't like Franz? Sorry.
Goes to fight Mitziegel. He's a 48er.
I have mixed feelings about Franz.
He's a 48er. He's a 48er.
And I admire him for being a 48er. But now we're really getting. But yet here you have a situation where Van Dorn's army does nearly outnumber the Federal forces by nearly 2-1. And what does he do? He divides his force with a very prominent ridge, Pea Ridge, dividing those two elements. And he also, in order to increase the speed of his march, he leaves behind his supply train.
Yeah.
Right before battle. So
with
impetuosity,
questionable reconnaissance.
Yeah, that question and that is putting it mildly questionable.
He did have his Choctaws who did a little bit of that, but again, now you're looking at two different perspectives: a Native American doing reconnaissance versus what a West-trained officer would expect to receive as useful information.
Sure, and especially with what Curtis had set up across the the field, artillery that was hidden. And, there are certain things that happen in battles that you have no control over. And when your field commanders are getting hit and you have no idea that they're down and you're continuing to send forces in to where you think they need to go, or you have planned for them to go, and your field commanders are dead, and they bumble into an open field that is literally almost pre-sighted with artillery, and they got the full effect of it. If Curtis's artillery had not have been at Pea Ridge, they would have lost that fight. It ended up being a bloody draw, but they would have been driven from the field. In my humble opinion, I would say they probably would have been, and if Van Dorn would have had his shit together, but he didn't. And like I said before, he stumbled into that fight and he put units in piecemeal, and you get the result.
Yeah, it's almost like he was not commanding an army, but he sunk back down to a much lower echelon of command where his focus was very specific to one location and not taking into an account the entire battlefield that was taking place.
Once the battle was engaged, it seems like he did no communication with the right wing, and it was exceptional bad luck that you have two commanders get McCullough and then McIntosh killed so quickly in the fight,
and that'll kill your initiative quick on the battlefield.
The American contingent
that wouldn't go in.
They couldn't. They obviously they were not used to being under artillery fire. Melted away, and that first day he lost about half of his army.
But
I don't think there was any command and control from Van Dorn from that wing. And on the other wing, it seems like Price was doing most of the heavy lifting as a commander.
Sure, and also I think that some of the, I wouldn't say rivalry, but Price being the not the new guy in the theater, I don't think that he was as readily available for anything that Van Dorn would have needed, taking over that command. And so I think that it was a perfect storm at, the Battle of Pea Ridge, that you had poor leadership, you had troops that literally did not know what they were doing, and you also had the absolute of nature, which even if they had won that battle and driven Curtis off the field, they still would have had to have retreated back into Missouri or over into another area, into Indian territory, to get any kind of supplies. And so that's, there you go. That's Van Dorn in a nutshell, is right here, right now. And then no forethought or what the fuck is going to happen next.
Yeah, to throw insult to injury, too, after that first day of battle, that first night, moving into the second day, dropped drastically in temperature.
Yes.
As well. So that's hard on your soldiers if they're not well-clothed.
Or fed.
That weather's definitely going to hamper their morale the next day.
And I think there might have been an order, like I said, listeners, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there might have been an order passed down through that they were not allowed to start any kind of fires, because they knew that the next day it was going to be, they were sleeping on their muskets. Let's put it that way. So, a cold night, no rations, no heat. The next day is not going to go well.
Excellent conditions for a soldier's morale.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Makes me happy. Who am I kidding? We were talking about this before we started today. I was looking at some of the correspondence back and forth, this post-battle correspondence between Van Dorn and Curtis. So we're talking like March 9th. And this is some of that correspondence back and forth where Van Dorn is asking Curtis, hey, my dead are out here. Can I have permission to send my soldiers in under the flag of truce to to bury them, take care of our dead, and very gentlemanly thing that was done during the war. I will give it that one respect. When practical, those officers were always talking back and forth after an engagement to take care of their wounded or their dead off the battlefield. But one thing I was really getting a kick out of is when Van Dorn here, he's writing Curtis. Curtis writes back. So Van Dorn asks for permission to bury the dead. Curtis says, yes, by all means do so. But then Curtis does throw in his correspondence back to Van Dorn. The general regrets that we find on the battlefield, contrary to civilized warfare, many of the federal dead who were tomahawked, scalped, and their bodies shamefully mangled, and expresses a hope that this important struggle may not degenerate to a savage warfare.
Oh!
This is referring to those Choctaw Indians, I believe, that were part. Yeah.
Of course, we're referring to the natives.
Also, the Choctaw are being thrown under the bus.
The Choctaw are being thrown on the bus. Well, Van Dorn, not himself, but the adjutant general of Van Dorn responds back to Curtis. We thank you for letting us go and bury our dead. Got it. He does desire to inform you that many of our men who surrendered themselves prisoners of war were reported to him as having been murdered in cold blood by their captors, who were alleged to be Germans.
Oh, now the Germans are
into it.
Duchies. I gotta say it, the duchies.
No, but it was a rather embarrassing result for both sides. So didn't Van Dorn write to Jefferson Davis after the battle as well?
Well, in his report to Judah B. Benjamin, who at that time was the Secretary of War, again, I love Buck Van Dorn's power of positive thinking. I mean, he was Vincent Norman Peale before he was alive. So, it's the very end of his report that stands out. Speaking of Pea Ridge, he tells Buchanan, Benjamin, I was not defeated, but only foiled in my intentions.
Foiled in my intentions.
I am yet sanguine of success and will not cease to repeat my blows whenever the opportunity is offered.
Ooh, that sounds like a boxer who has just had his ass kicked.
And in subsequent reports, he's still, entertaining the prospect of continuing north to the St. Louis. Yeah. And here again, you've lost a battle. You've got hungry soldiers, you've got major supply issues, and yet his, visions of glory, if it's happening in his mind, it is possible. It's possible, people.
Sure. But that was something that was constantly said about Van Dorn, was that he didn't go into the fight looking to win the fight. He went in looking for glory. And in every single one of the engagements that he was ever involved in, if he, came out on top and he didn't dash his men against a fortified position like he did at Corinth, where they had to literally turn around and walk away thinking, holy shit, what just happened here? And basically have no further thrusts into a theater at all, or he does what he can possibly do and crush his, opponent right then, right now. But if that doesn't happen, I don't care. I'm done.
And, well, I think what happens after this battle is that was a substantial loss to the Confederacy. The Confederacy are never in Missouri again. Missouri's done for them effectively after the Battle of Pea Ridge.
Or Northwest Arkansas.
So really the only action that the Confederate forces could take now is to consolidate. So they end up pulling Van Dorn and his men out of that trans-Mississippi area, send them to the other side of the Mississippi to support who Pemberton is who he's assigned with, or yeah.
John C. Pemberton. And you get to a point where you start to get into the beginnings of the Vicksburg campaign. And Van Dorn is given the opportunity to do what he does best, which is small command, small action, and be able to make a difference. But we get to the point where he gets another command that's a little bit bigger than his britches, and there we are again.
Another flop in the annals of Van Dornism.
A what I like to call a flailing. I mean, he would literally, it almost seemed like every single time that he would get something larger than a group of 1,000 men, he would flail because he didn't know how to direct them. And he would rely on those that were, I guess in his echelon of command, and they didn't like him. I mean, fuck it, let's be honest. They didn't like him. I mean, he partied, he had fun, he did everything, and if you weren't into that,
pshaw.
Yeah, pshaw. How dare you? But he literally, I think that he pissed off a lot of his subordinates with his lifestyle, and a lot of these guys who were of the, I guess you would say the Episcopalian, the Southern Episcopal or Methodist or Baptist or whatever, they saw Van Dorn getting drunk and fucking around. It wasn't something that they would condone, or at least not publicly. Because, I mean, how could you not be on somebody's staff like that and take advantage of it if you didn't, you weren't a religious zealot, but a lot of them were. So what are you going to do? And that's where we get to that.
Yeah, he's floating around Mississippi, around the Vicksburg area, back and forth until October of 1862. And at that time, he is challenged with taking Corinth. Corinth, Mississippi is in the northern part of the state. A massive rail hub was taken back and forth. The Confederates initially had Corinth, but then after the Battle of Shiloh, with the Battle of First Corinth, Grant and Rosecrans was able to take that major rail installation.
Sure.
And even before the Union got there, the Confederates had erected fortifications.
Yeah.
The Union come in throughout the late summer of 1862 and build even more fortifications. You were saying, what'd you say? It was like the most
It was the most fortified city in the Western Hemisphere. If you look at how Gettysburg, all roads lead to Gettysburg. Well, those are roads. Same thing at Corinth. All railroads lead to Corinth. And that was why they needed to hold it, because it was in northeastern Mississippi, and it was the absolute penultimate control of the rail system in that part of the South.
Because it was a juncture of the major, north-south and
everything. And it still is. If you go there today,
a lot of railroads still cut through there. Yeah,
and you stand in the junction of the tracks. I think there are 6 sets of tracks that run through there, that run over that switch. So you've got, it's still an important rail hub, even though the stops aren't there anymore or anything like that. But either way, that was the reason why Van Dorn was heading to Corinth with that army, was to take that back. And as Paul said, he thought erroneously and with bad information and bad reconnaissance that the Union Army had apparently, in the year and a few months that he hadn't been there, they hadn't done anything.
Right.
And I guess that may have been his opinion of his former 1842 classmate, Rosecrans, old Rosie, but they had definitely built up the area around Corinth. One example is Battery Robinette. Battery Robinette was a redoubt in the center part of the battlefield, and was assaulted by the 4th Texas, and the guns that were inside of that battery were 10 and 20 pound Parrots. And they did exponential damage to the units that were attacking that particular position. Like I said, specifically the 4th Texas. But that is part and parcel of what Van Dorn did not take into account. Not only the strength of the defensive position, but what was happening all the way around Corinth.
Oh, yeah. The sheer amount of Abatis and Cheval de Free and everything. I wanted to say that again. Saying Cheval de Free turns me on.
It's such a beautiful
let me just do that again. Cheval de Free. All right. No, it was heavily fortified.
French military language, Paul.
Oh, right. Sorry. Catapult? No, I don't know where that. No. Am I wrong? Gabion, bastions.
Bastion. Yeah.
Gabion.
That's a good one.
Heavily fortified, and really any military scholar knows that you at least have a 3-to-1 ratio when assaulting a defended position. That should be the ultimate ratio you would be looking for. Now, if he had the forces like P. Ridge, may have had an opportunity to attack a place like Corinth, maybe, when he had that ratio in his advantage.
Sure,
but by Corinth, like I said, P. Ridge was the one, if not the very few times.
Yeah.
By Corinth, they're almost 1 for 1.
Exactly.
So you don't have a 3-to-1 advantage to attack a heavily defended position.
And part of it too is that, when those outer defenses were built, Beauregard at that time, even after Shiloh, he might have built up his force maybe 55,000, but he was facing a Union army of 120,000. So,
and we're talking about Pierre Gustave Touton Beauregard.
Oh, more French.
More French. Anyway, but those defenses were built for much, larger conflict between larger armies, and Rosecrans had what, about 23,000 or something like that at Corinth,
but entrenched. I mean, but
it stood to reason that with a smaller force, which even Van Dorn recognized, even though he might not have known the specific numbers, he knew he was facing a small force. He should have expected that there would have been an inner line of defense closer to the rail hub. That they would that they could fall back to or defend, at the first assault.
And you're absolutely right. And I will say this is that even though we are saying that basically he destroyed his army going against these, much larger fortifications that had been built around, they still achieved a breakthrough. If he would have used his forces more judiciously in that breakthrough, or actually had been on the field to see the breakthrough and see where to put reinforcements to exploit the breach,
yes,
he might have been able to carry the day. But he didn't, and now we have a wonderful painting by, I think it's Don Troiani, of basically the high water mark of the Battle of Corinth. And it was one of the first instances of not only the Civil War, but of modern warfare of urban combat. The Tishomingo Hotel was full of Union first and then Confederate snipers, but it was actual urban combat. And, we can get into the weeds with that. But like I said, if he would have exploited the breach, he would have been able to carry the day. But he did the old Buck Van Dorn. He wasn't there to see it and thought it would be, like you said, Chris, power of positive thinking. Shit will work out.
Yeah, and that led to an inevitable retreat and counterattack by Union forces. So they were at least smart to try to follow up that advantage. They had severely weakened Van Dorn's forces at Corinth. Yes. So and as he's pulling back, they're at least, you have the likes of Grant and Rosecrans smart enough to try to follow that new initiative that they've gained by weakening the enemy. But Van Dorn was able to now stop it by down as far south as like Grenada, Mississippi. They were able to finally halt that counteroffensive against them post Corinth.
Yeah. And just as an example of the mini disaster that the Second Battle of Corinth was, the Union lost about 2,500, they had 2,500 casualties, and the Confederates had over 4,200. So, you're talking 20% casualties.
Yeah.
Heavy.
And if we take a look at some of the pictures of the West, photographs that were taken to the war, it was that battle. The Confederate dead are laid out in front of Battery Robinette, and those are some of the most famous pictures of the war. Of the dead of the 4th Texas, and that was Van Dorn's doing. They were crushed in front of that position. But like we've said before,
with their Colonel,
Rogers, Colonel Rogers, and his body armor. He was wearing armor plate, and thought that his armor plate would if you look at it this way.
We just talked about this.
Yeah,
pan shot.
That's right.
Yeah, boy.
He's literally he's wearing that. He's wearing armor and he's crushed. But that's a picture of him laying there with his body armor on that's riddled with holes. But like you said, that we get back to it, and that was one thing that Van Dorn was very good at, was sending good men and good troops against positions that he could not carry.
No, most officers should have recognized that.
Yeah.
But, well, I mean, it doesn't really, it doesn't go well for him after the battle, after he created so much hamburger.
Mm-hmm.
There's a point of inquiry going on.
Oh, yeah.
What's interesting, though, is how he was relieved of command.
So many people that literally were like, he needs to be dealt with.
Yes. Yes.
But I think he was relieved in command within, a week?
Pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Less
easy
than
to
2
do.
weeks
Right.
after the battle.
Quicker than an era that did not have telephone.
But it was the inevitable court of inquiry that kind of like, whatever.
Yeah.
Let him off.
Yeah.
Right.
And they did. They gave testimony that, every single charge that was levied against him of drunkenness, of, just being a complete failure. If there were people to step forth that would say, no, that's not our general. We've never seen him like that. And basically the court of inquiry said, yep. And I think it may have been an instance of, we don't have time for this shit.
Yeah, it's a full acquittal.
Yeah.
Even though Van Dorn had been unanimously acquitted in the court of inquiry after the Battle of Corinth, his reputation really was in the shitter, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
And Senator, I believe this letter is from early December of 1862. Senator Phelan of Mississippi wrote Confederate President Jefferson Davis. The letter is sort of talking about the woeful state of Mississippi at this point in time, but he particularly was harsh on Van Dorn, and he said Van Dorn is regarded as the source of all of our woes and disaster. It is prophesied will attend us as long as he's connected with this army. The atmosphere is dense with horrid narratives of his negligence, whoring, and drunkenness.
Ooh.
For the truth of which I cannot vouch. But it is so fastened on the public belief that an acquittal by a court-martial of angels would not relieve him of the charges. And then continuing on, he goes, the army, I believe, have no respect for him, have lost confidence in themselves, and will not fight under him.
Ooh.
And yet, at the end of this very month, December 1862, there's a bit of the glorious 20th. There's a change of fortunes for Buck Van Dorn.
Buck Van Dorn, back in the saddle
again.
Back into the cavalry realm, I take it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's the only place he's good.
Once, yes.
Smaller
unit combat.
Yep.
And he does excel. And so,
He does. Small unit, not combined arms. Right.
He's a tactician, not a strategist. You know?
Right. And for those who don't know the difference between the terms, please read up on this because there is a difference.
There is.
Yeah, definitely.
It's massive.
And this gives him. So even though he was relieved of previous command, Holly Springs occurs this miraculous event, and he's now re-elevated to higher command levels. So right after Holly Springs, he's given command of the Department of Mississippi for all cavalry forces. And by March of 1863, after a couple of smaller victories within that command, he's given command of the entire cavalry corps for the Army of Tennessee. And this is before those Middle Tennessee engagements, Tullahoma campaign, as Union forces begin their move south towards Chattanooga. This is well before that happens. He ends up over in Spring Hill, Tennessee, where his headquarters are going to be set up to take on that new challenge in his career.
Yeah. He
challenges of several different levels.
It would be very challenging for him, yes.
Yeah. He's moved now into the realm of the Twilight Zone. This is where
What?
This is where General Buck Van Dorn
Right.
literally gets, I guess you would say, his final comeuppance as a rake and a Lothario, if you will. This is where he is now at Spring Hill, as Paul mentioned, Spring Hill, Tennessee. He is making his headquarters at Whitehall, which is a mansion and plantation that's owned by a guy by the name of Aaron White, who is also a doctor. And Van Dorn is at this beautiful mansion, and apparently the White family asks him to leave because he is being
Inappropriate
or accused of being untoward.
Maybe let's just call it overly familiar.
Yeah, very
familiar.
Yeah,
familiar. So isn't that the word the register used?
Exactly. He's being very familiar with.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, various and sundry. I don't think it was Mrs. White, but shit, who knows? But he's
it was not. Let's not sully Mrs. White's.
We're not gonna.
She's not part of the story. Okay.
Let's not burn her.
I think it was a neighbor. A neighbor lady.
What's really neat are a lot of the mansions we're going to talk about. I think all of them are still standing down there, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and actually, I think a few of them are for sale. Was the last recent article that I read was from a couple of months ago. I don't know if it's been sold since, but yeah, this actually particular mansion is for sale for $1 million. So pony up, boys.
Right.
But yeah, that's where he's at. He's there. He's asked to leave, and he moves his 3-ring circus over to a home that is called Ferguson Hall, and it is a massive house. I think it has 12 rooms, spiral staircases, hardwood floors, 12 fireplaces. It's huge.
Multiple porticos.
Yeah, multiple porticos. Any place you can enjoy a julep, there is a place to enjoy it.
I'm confused. Is that French?
Yeah.
Julep.
But
Julet?
this is where old, Bucky Van Dorn's got his digs at this point, is over at Ferguson Hall. And that's where we get into his social life and I guess just general awesomeness.
General awesomeness, yeah.
If somebody was going to put Earl Van Dorn in jail, it would have been for being too awesome.
This was a part of Middle Tennessee that hadn't been terribly affected by the war quite yet.
Strangely, where it was and being as close as it was to Nashville.
So a lot of the families that were there,
I think it hadn't been.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the families that were there were still having social engagements, gatherings, parties, especially those of means.
Yeah, sure.
For sure. And that's where he's meeting certain women of the area.
Yeah. Ladies that have decided to come and see the general and his staff for the cause.
Because he's in Spring Hill, and we've got Union forces at Franklin, a day's march away, less than a day's march away.
Not even.
As we find out from the Battle of Franklin. So
absolutely.
Lines very close together, but...
And like I said, the Union in complete and utter control of Nashville, which was the second major Confederate city to fall. So at this point in the war, they've been in control of Nashville for well into a year. And it amazes me that these guys were just kicking it. It seems from what we've read that these guys were going to parties more than they were plotting attacking Nashville or doing anything of what they were supposed to be doing.
Old Rosie was giving him a certain amount of breathing space before he formulated his grand plan.
Sure.
Now, is this the first or second home he was kicked out of?
This, from what I've read, this was the White Hall was the first.
The first one, okay.
Yeah, the second one he was carried out as a corpse. So
later.
So I don't know if that counts as being kicked out. I don't know. I mean,
excommunicated, evicted. What is the word for that?
Extirpated from the world.
So far as we know, while alive, he was only kicked out of one mansion.
One home in the area.
Well, he does catch the attention of Jessie Peters.
Yes.
The wife of Dr. George Body Peters.
Yes.
George Peters was a physician. He was pretty well off. He had a lot of business dealings, Memphis, Nashville, Arkansas.
And he was also known for his medical work on ulcers.
I did not know that. I didn't see that anywhere, really.
He was known for his work on ulcers.
Did he deal with polyps as well?
I don't think so. I think he was just an ulcer man.
Well, a polyp in 1863 is easy to fix. That's 3 tablespoons of mercury.
Of course, the cure-all.
The cure-all, yes.
Dump it on or dump it in you.
Cure-all of ancient times.
Peters, pretty interesting guy. We might talk about him more so here in a little bit. He's born in North Carolina, died in Memphis, Tennessee, 1888. By the time we have Jessie in our story, that's his third wife. Mm-hmm. So he's already been married a couple of other times and has children from those other marriages. He was definitely a prominent physician. He moved to Tennessee around 1859. He was elected a state senator after the war, moved to a plantation in Arkansas. But yeah, we'll talk about him more. But he, in his own right, was a fairly successful gentleman. He had business dealings all over the place. Yeah. And one thing that you'll see about him is because his businesses and the transactions that he needed to fulfill were across Union and Confederate lines. So he is constantly going back and forth between Confederate territory and Union territory. He's always doing different, like he swore several times a loyalty oath to the Union just to get through the lines so he can go commit his business transactions.
Yeah. And at this point, he's 51 years old. He's like you said, Paul, he's a doctor, he's a farmer. And he made most of his money in real estate and dealing in slaves. But he is a prominent man in the area, and he's got, as his third wife, a trophy wife. He's got himself a 25-year-old Corvette. 1860.
But certainly, with a man of such stature, as Dr. Peters, I mean, General Van Dorn would not even consider approaching the doctor's wife.
No, actually, you wouldn't think. No, that's right up. That's Van Dorn to a T. He's definitely, especially like Paul said, the good doctor was not around much. He was taking care of of his business dealings in Nashville and various and sundry other towns in Western Tennessee or in Eastern Tennessee, and his 25-year-old wife apparently at these homes in Spring Hill was the belle of the ball, and she took a liking to old Bucky Van Dorn, and old Buck Van Dorn took a liking to her. So that's where we get to right now.
He of the flowing hair, blue eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, do I need to reread the Confederate veteran?
Yeah, actually, Paul, if
do we need it? Oh, boy. No, we don't need to do that.
I mean, you guys at this point,
it's in a pile of papers.
Yeah. And her name was Mrs. Jessie Peters. Her maiden name was McKissick, and like we said, she was his third wife. They had 2 children in this marriage at this point.
William and Lucy.
Yes. The marriage was rocky, I guess you would say. There was an instance where there was a gentleman caller who showed up to their home drunk, and Dr. Peters heard about it. And within a week, that gentleman caller was found face down in a pond in the area. Obviously not breathing unless he was a fish, but this seemed to be something that happened. I wouldn't say all the time, but it seemed like something that happened. And I don't think Earl Van Dorn was the first, gentleman caller to knock on that door. And I think the good doctor knew that it was going to be a problem for whatever reason. And so we get to where we are now with old Bucky Van Dorn and Jesse meeting each other at a party.
Oh, yes. And met they did,
Yeah.
From what I could tell.
Yeah.
And he also met Clara, who was a daughter of George from his first marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Clara Polka Peters, who was born in 1848.
Which would make her how old?
Oh, math? 15.
Nope.
15, is that right? I just guessed.
Yeah, she's 15.
So you do have a stepdaughter, or a daughter of George Peters, living with Jessie Peters, the stepmother,
mm-hmm.
at the same time. And evidence is starting to lead us to believe, which makes this kind of weird, is that Van Dorn may have been with both.
Yeah. Yeah. It would seem from some of the research that we've done that, and other better historians before us, that it would seem that Clara started to gain a little bit of weight, and she was taken or moved or otherwise whisked away to Missouri.
We need to back up.
Yeah.
Because this happens even after the shooting.
Yeah. Yeah. But
let's back up.
Yeah.
Let's do this. We're going to do this right. So George has high suspicions that Jessie, his trophy wife, is enjoying herself with General Earl Van Dorn.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not good. He's gone for months anyway, and he starts hearing rumors that something may be going on from afar.
But the rumors are
hearsay.
Hearsay
and undocumented. Undocumented, by the way.
But from what we've heard, that he was hearing these rumors from people coming back and forth through the lines. They were telling him, that
wasn't one like his his son from the first marriage. Like he had a son.
Yeah.
That had heard rumor when he visited Jessie. He felt suspicious when he went to visit his father because of whatever the case may be. He was an officer in the Confederate Army. Went to visit his father, who was in Memphis or somewhere north at the time.
Yes.
Told him about his suspicions.
Yeah. And from that point, we go
It was Thomas, his first son.
Thomas, yes. And Thomas was, I believe, a lieutenant in the Confederate Army. And if we are to take Bridget Smith's account of why Thomas was visiting his father, it was because he had the clap. And as we said before, or I said before, his father was...
That's what Bridget leads us to believe. Yeah.
Good with ulcers.
Yep.
So perhaps that was the reason why he was there, but that was out of her
He
novel.
needed a good cleanse.
Yeah, it's a very good interpretation of why.
Sword, I guess.
But either way, he had heard from people that was what was going on in Spring Hill. So he told his dad, and his father went back, and he told Van Dorn in no uncertain terms. What did he say, Paul? The whole thing about him saying he walked in and he said, there are several different accounts. So we'll get to that, but there are several different accounts.
Yeah,
of
Van Dorn,
when the Dr. Peters came back.
He told Van Dorn, apparently, this is per his statement to the Army of the Cumberland Provost. George Peters did file a statement afterwards, and that fortunately was documented with the Army of the Cumberland. But he did threaten Van Dorn that he would blow his brains out, or any of his staff that stepped their foot inside of the lawn. And this stemmed from possibly like a party invitation coming from an aide of Van Dorn coming up to the Peters house.
Yes.
And that right then, based on those suspicions, he already realized that this courier was from Van Dorn, and hey, get off my lot. Get off my lawn. Get off my lawn. I'm going to blow your brains out. So he actually said and threatened at that time that he would blow his brains out.
Okay. Exactly right. So there are different accounts of what happened when the doctor came back. There is an instance of him coming back early in the morning. I think it was May the 5th. And he saw Van Dorn leaving his home, and he confronted him, and Van Dorn said to him, I would understand why you would shoot me right now, and you have every right to. And the doctor apparently said to him, well, if you sign a piece of paper stating that Jesse had nothing to do with this, then I won't kill you. But if you don't, then I will blow your brains out. And apparently he had dragged Van Dorn out from underneath a porch of his home.
He was hiding in a dress like Jeff Davis?
No.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
He was hiding like any person that was caught, messing around with some guy's old lady. He was pulled out, and the doctor told this grandiose story about him telling him everything like this. And in several of the sources' questions, Van Dorn was tough. I don't see this 51-year-old doctor yanking him out from under his porch like a skunk and, demanding this of him. And supposedly this is what he did. And he gave him 2 days, 48 hours to come up with this. And Van Dorn went away, and the doctor went inside, and we don't know what happened then.
In his statement, he makes it seem like that Van Dorn at gunpoint that evening was quite the coward.
Yeah.
And that he promised to write a sworn statement saying that I'm guilty of all these things.
Yeah. And it was Jesse had nothing to do with it. And just in case anybody or what he had heard.
Just in case, can you mention my daughter?
Yeah.
She's innocent too.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to know about her? It's exactly right. He literally said,
I don't see old Buck doing this.
No, I don't see anybody, like I said, especially a 51-year-old nerd dragging him out from.
I know there's several scenarios of how this went down, and I already have my vote in on.
You're picturing them all right now.
Exactly. It worked.
No,
like
but
that.
I'm. Yeah, anyway.
Right, exactly.
Let's continue with the different scenarios.
Exactly, but either way, this is where we are in this story. Is that this is basically the predication for murder, is what it is, and we get to what the next day or 2 days later, Paul.
Well, he was supposed to come back the next day to get that written statement, but he even admits himself that he wasn't feeling
shit to do.
Yeah, he wasn't feeling well the immediate day after, so it wasn't until the second day that he came back to the headquarters of Van Dorn to demand his written statement.
Demand, yes.
And Van Dorn pretty much said bugger off, would be my take. A man like Van Dorn wouldn't.
Now, from what I read,
when you make a comment like that, you need to put in an English accent.
Yeah.
I apologize. Next time, I'll remember that.
It is the Christmas episode. It's the holiday episode, so we should be Scrooge-ish about
That's
it.
That's right.
Yeah. It's a Dickens tale. But
if they're going to die, they might as well do it. Decrease the surplus population.
I love
it. That's the best quote of that story, by the way.
Guys get fit a little bit of Dickens into this podcast. Right? I think that's great, especially
there you go.
Holidays.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Exactly. Yeah.
Jingle bells, Batman smells.
Oh, how Dickens of you!
But he literally, at this point, he's ripe for murder. I guess, if you would say, is where we are with what's going to happen.
Right. And the way Peters puts it in his statement is that when Van Dorn pretty much refused to provide those written statements, he's like, I answered, well, yeah, you didn't think that about 30 hours ago when your life was in my hands.
That's what he said.
So smug.
That's right. That's what he says. And not only that, and the whole thing is that he apparently says that to him, and he says again. And there were two instances in the sources that he said this specifically, not only to one of Van Dorn's aides that had brought him a message from him, but to Van Dorn himself, was that I'm going to blow your brains out. I guess that might have been the parlance of the time, but he said it twice, and it was recorded twice that he said that specifically. I'm going to blow your brains out to two different men. Okay, fine. So now we get to where he says that, and that's when he goes back to, and he says to Van Dorn, what he says, I signed the thing, or, the other night.
Well, he came to get a pass through Union Line, first of all.
And then he gets to the point where he says in his statement to the provost of the Army of the Cumberland that he asked Van Dorn for the written statement that he was told he was going to sign, and basically told him no. And he said, well, the other night, you blah, blah, blah. And Van Dorn says, take to that door or I will kick you. Or no, what is it? I apologize. Take, you damn dog.
Yeah, you
take
damn.
To that door,
I got it right here.
I will kick you.
Yeah, you damned cowardly dog. Take that door or I will kick you out of it. There we go. Yeah, there we go.
And in my mind, like I said, before we started recording, is that they didn't talk like that. And all I can hear is Van Dorn saying, get out of here, you goddamn dog, or I'm going to kick you like you son of a bitch in this.
There may have been a son of a bitch in there. I'd throw one in for good measure.
And if that happened, that's how it happened. But there are several conflicting...
I'm looking at his statements now. And you're talking about a guy right now yelling at me, saying he's going to kick me out of the door. But then later on, he goes on to say that Van Dorn was seated at his desk. And this is his own testimony, which is a little different. I mean, if I was yelling at somebody, probably going to be standing and facing you. And this is where he gets into his statement, George Peters, that is. I immediately drew my pistol, aiming to shoot him in the forehead. Now, that would make sense if he was yelling at you in an argumentative stance, right? He's going to be facing me. When, by a convulsion movement of his head, he received the shot in the left side of his head, just above the ear, killing him instantly. This is where it gets really weird. So, and everyone says you shot him in the back of the head. So are you trying to cover your tracks in your statement?
Every single other account of the general's death from anybody who witnessed his body said that he was shot in the back of the head. He, as in Dr. Peters, is the only person of a written account that says that it was above the left ear, blah, blah, blah.
And then Van Dorn was seated at his desk, which that contradicts itself completely.
No, and exactly right. And then you find the other accounts of officers, of random soldiers that were either there, close to, or witnessed right after. And they said that when they walked in, the I would say the most accurate account is from an anonymous source from a letter that was sent to Van Dorn's sister after his death. And I think it was in the 1870s is when the letter got to her. And it said that Van Dorn was shot from behind. His head was laying against the glass in on a pane of a window. His right arm was on the desk like he had just gotten done signing something. His left hand was in his lap.
George Peters' pass.
Yeah, exactly. And the blood was spurting from the wound onto the glass. So you have that account, and then you have another account of somebody coming in later on that is one of Van Dorn's, I guess you would say, one of his
adjutants or something like that.
And they say that not only was that accurate, but the inkwell that he kept inside of his desk and the pen were not only out, but wet with ink. So it seems to me that old Dr. Peters said, "Hey, can you sign this pass for me, General?" And he's like, "Oh, shit, sure." And he went and he said, "Hey, let me get this for you." And he said, "Sure." And he went behind him, and there you go.
And that was so shady at the time that it gets to the point where immediately after the killing of Bucky, that even his fellow officers within the Confederate Army are now questioning George Peters and his motives.
Yeah.
So I know, going back to Confederate Veteran Magazine.
Whoa!
Yeah,
very fine source.
Oh, very fine size. Primary source. He had lost his property on the Arkansas side of the Mississippi River, and he remarked that he would soon recover it. Apparently, according to the Confederate officers, that was a statement that George Peters made shortly before shooting Van Dorn. So they felt that there were other motives as well involved. Not only
conspiracy theory,
not only George Peters angry that he was, with his wife and maybe daughter, but that there were other higher Union motives to it as well. Yeah.
And I mean, I'm gonna plug right here. It's when it gets super civil. It's when we get to a point where not only does Dr. Peters walk out of General Van Dorn's headquarters, he gets on his horse and rides away unabsconded. I mean, unabsconded. I don't think that's a fucking real word. He absconds to Nashville.
This is civil word. We can
make up words.
Yeah, we make civil words too.
Right.
But he does. I mean, he splits.
And then those stories that someone had taken down rail fences for his escape path as well, which adds into the.
He could have a direct line straight back to Nashville.
It was Castro.
People literally is an inside job.
Mafia.
It's an inside job.
Yeah,
Yep.
it was the Tropicana version.
Lee Harvey's great grandfather.
Exactly. Jack Ruby.
He got the mafia out of the take of Middle Tennessee.
Exactly. The Dixie Mafia. But he literally he rides away and nobody stops him. And he gets back into Union lines, and then that's where it gets even weirder, is where he leaves. Supposedly he's arrested by Confederate authorities, and they say, we've captured the murderer of General Van Dorn, and we want to bring him back to Tennessee, but there are no courts. So what do we do? And General Johnston, who is the head of the Army of Tennessee, says, I don't know. And at that point, supposedly there's a trial.
We never really liked him anyway. Just let him go.
Yeah, that's exactly what, and that's what it seems to be, is that it gets to the point where they've captured this man. And supposedly, and I say it again, supposedly there's some sort of trial with no record, and he's acquitted because people don't give a shit about Van Dorn.
And I was looking for any kind of Confederate record
Nothing.
on a trial, and zilch. And if there were documents, they could have been destroyed through the war. That's
and it was
a possibility.
At that point,
Yeah.
in that area, and I understand that. But if there was a trial, you would think that at that point there would be
even post-war hearsay.
something.
Yeah.
But there's nothing. And I don't think there was a trial. I think that literally he got away scot-free. I mean, he
already
walked
had
away.
his pass signed by Van Dorn.
And what did it matter at that point? He's got a signature. And he basically, if we get to the conspiracy part of it, even if he was, I guess you would say, tasked by the Union command in going in and assassinating Van Dorn, I don't really think that the trade craft of the time really would have required everything that happened afterwards. I think this was a matter of, as we've stated, General Van Dorn had defiled the doctor's home.
And I'm sure that played a huge part in him never being convicted of it because, like you say,
and it was the old...
From all indications, yeah, I mean, Van Dorn,
honor.
How...
Chivalry
whatever
and honor.
The glowing reviews of his personality and appearance and all that, and whatever he had done for the Confederacy, I mean, he had crossed that line.
Sure.
And
it's the age old tale. Don't fuck around with another guy's old lady, or don't shit where you eat. And he did both.
Though I still find it very difficult to believe, a lot of Dr. Peter's testimony, where he had warned Van Dorn off, and Van Dorn had,
especially up to the shooting. Yeah.
No, I think the only reason that Dr. Peters got into the office without being challenged or whatever is because he had not threatened Van Dorn.
No.
Had he made that kind of deathly threat, Van Dorn would have told his staff, do not admit
this man. Yeah. That is a good point. I didn't think of that.
Even though I'd say it yet again, Van Dorn, the power of positive thinking.
That is a great point.
I can cross the threshold of your home and buy,
right,
and take your wife, but you won't do anything to me. Of course not.
Right.
What could possibly happen? And I think Dr. Peters went in there, and while Peters is warming himself by the fireplace, and Van Dorn was over there by the window writing out that pass, he shot him in the back of the head.
Back of the head.
There was no sudden convulsion of the head. There was after that.
After he shot him,
the blood coming out. I mean, it's going to make somebody. But even
into the
one
left.
of the statements, it said that General Van Dorn was convulsing at the window.
Yeah, After the
After he shot
bullet
him.
hit him.
After he got lead poisoning the easy way. But I mean, seriously, if you think about it this way, the doctor, even if he killed Van Dorn for, I guess you would say, property, reacquisition of property or whatever it was, there was a reason for his, I guess you wouldn't say acquittal, but there was a reason for him to, I guess, after the war, for people to not give a shit. And it was because of the main rumor, which you have to call it a rumor because every account that we've seen, yes, they took carriage rides, yes, they knew each other, but even their correspondence back and forth, it's basically, thank you for coming out with the Lady Society and, giving us lemonade. And
It was before Snapchat.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It was before there was an internet presence that you could track until somebody's birth. But she literally, that was all it took. And it was the old South. And these Cavaliers, as Van Dorn was, and as Dr. Peters was a respected physician in the area, he was not about to abide a man like Van Dorn messing around with his wife, especially if there had been instances of another suitor that had ended up face down in a ditch. I don't think that it may have been a conflated conspiracy that he was going to kill him because of property rights or any of that kind of shit. But I think it may have been one of those things where when it was an opportunity and people knew what it was, they took advantage of it. And they said, hey, Doc, figure this shit out. And you might get what has been taken from you back.
I'm gonna disagree slightly. I'll go 50-50 with you on it.
Yeah.
Chivalry 50%, wanting my property back from the confiscation of the federal government 50%.
Sure.
I'll take that.
I mean, and that's 100% of fuck you. I mean, if you think about it that way, I mean, 50-50, and you're going to figure out a way to, get the 100% of fuck you. And if he did, that's exactly what he got.
I do have this article that I took from the Illinois State Register, and being a Springfield-based podcast, this was our historic local newspaper. This is from May 26th, 1863. And it's the first notice that I could find in a Springfield paper pertaining to the shooting of Van Dorn. So it took a little time for it to make its way up here. Southern papers print the particulars of the killing of the Tennessee General Van Dorn by Peters for undue familiarity with his wife. Peters called on Van Dorn for a pass to Nashville, which was, of course, readily granted. And while they were alone together, the shot was fired that split Van Dorn's head in two. I love it. The report was not heard, however, and Peters mounted his horse, rode away, and crossed the lines with the pass previously obtained to Nashville. Wine and women ruined Van Dorn, as they have ruined many another brilliant but reckless man. It goes on to say that Van Dorn was keen, intelligent, but was wholly and thoroughly unreliable. He was either tied to a woman's apron strings or heated with wine.
Bummer.
Yeah, bummer. So again, that was the State Register from right here in Springfield, Illinois. But another fun story that I found was from Vanity Fair. We want to go and venture through Vanity Fair. This one's from June 8th, 1863. What's it say here? Of course, you have heard about the killing of Earl Van Dorn of the so-called Confederate Army. There are some odd facts connecting with this affair. Van Dorn was shot by a Dr. Peters for having too sweet on his daughter. It now turns out that Van Dorn did not know Miss P. It was the doctor's wife. He never saw this lady, however, and wasn't any such man. Further, it is greatly doubted whether Peters shot him at all.
That feeds into conspiracy stuff, but
It does. It's Vanity Fair.
And I mean, honestly, if you think about it this way, I mean, that's why it's so weird, is that there was nobody is 100% sure if he shot him. Nobody's 100% sure how he shot him. Nobody's 100% sure where literally there you have guys that were saying, oh, I was 300 yards away and I heard the shot. Well, okay. You did? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And they signed their name to an affidavit. They're full of shit. There's no way and I mean, nobody really knows what he was actually shot with. Was he shot with a Derringer? Was he shot with a 6-round revolver? I mean, what was he shot with?
You know, I did this for Boston. I'll do it right now. If you know where that pistol or revolver exists and it's for sale, let me know. I'd like to know about it.
Yep. We'll scoop it up.
Would you like to provide further contact information, Paul?
No, they know how to contact us now, right? Yeah.
We're out there.
We're out on the internet. Yeah.
Okay.
AKRAL4@uis.edu.
I'll offer $75 right now.
Yep.
However, you have to have provenance.
Yeah. Low ball with provenance.
I think that's a little lower than what you offered for Boston.
It was Boston. I think is a higher end of it. Yeah.
I agree with you. It's
Bigger
never
event.
worth the
Yeah.
money.
Bigger event. Van Dorn had a longer, crazier life, but you know,
Anything Lincoln related's $25 more.
I mean,
So
especially if it's a hat. Anyway,
even though no one witnessed who did this, Dr. Peters did. I mean, he did confess.
oh
to
yes,
this
Oh, yes.
murder.
yes.
Yeah.
So at the very least, I mean, don't you think the consensus of agreement is that at the very least, Dr. Peters did kill Buck Van Dorn?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. He admitted to it. His statement was fully documented. He, to my knowledge, never stood any formal trial that documentation can provide.
I really love that we're Joe Johnston, when he's he basically threw up his hands and said, well, we have no courts in the state of Tennessee.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that all of Tennessee was under Confederate control. I mean, or under Union control at the time of the murder, but that does provide an intriguing little tidbit on these conspiracy theories. I mean, it's like, oh, so sorry.
Yeah.
I can't,
Seriously,
I
it's
can't
like,
do anything about
I
it.
can't figure that out, so we're just going to put it in the ether and not worry about it because it doesn't fit our narrative. So,
Yeah, it'd be nice it'd be nice to try them, but we have no mechanism for that. Really interesting.
Yeah, George Peters is off of this. He never. There's no.
he skates.
It's out. It skates. It's done deal for him. Quite honestly. However, this goes back to what we were mentioning earlier. Is that even the news stories of the time are reporting back and forth. Well, was it Peters's his wife or was it his daughter? And that's going back and forth. Now, here's where we definitely get into some gray area where there's evidence, there's a little smoke out there, maybe not fire, but there may have been a birth out of that relationship.
Yeah,
May have been
enough to dig into.
So at the time, there is some smoke there, but the fire, maybe not there, maybe down the road, who knows? Clara was a daughter, I mentioned her already, of George Peters's first wife. She was born in 1848, putting her at 15 at the time, 1863. Now, there's another daughter who's born, if you look at the genealogy, who's born from the Jesse George marriage, his third marriage into Jesse Peters. Medora is born on 26 January 1864. Surprisingly, 9 months after the date where Van Dorn would have been interacting with the Peters family. It could be Jesse's daughter, or is it Clara's daughter of his first marriage? His daughter. Now, now we're getting into Arkansas genealogy here. So, but there's suspicion there that there are questions that could be raised. We do know that George sent Clara to St. Louis quickly.
Yeah. She was sent to a convent, and there is correspondence back and forth between Dr. Peters and the, I guess you would say, the head mother of the convent, saying that she's doing okay. She's gaining weight. And, everything's going to be fine. And it would seem to this historian that she is talking about her being pregnant and she's about to have a kid. Whether that is the actual reason of why she went to that convent or not, it doesn't really matter, because that's where she ended up, and that is absolutely verifiable. And whether that child was born to her through, Van Dorn is another question that is left to be unanswered. And I mean, it's a wild question, because,
and that's a very common thing for grandparents to do in those instances. You see it up through genealogy, 1920s, 1930s. Families tend to hide illegitimacy.
Yeah, sure.
So that could be very common, that Clara had a daughter via Van Dorn, and they just chalked it up as one of their daughters to protect the family, to protect the name, to protect the business interests, maybe.
Sure. Well, especially when you have a stepmother who's relatively young herself. And, at the time of the birth of this, she was 25, 26. I mean, she's, so it's, for an outsider, it's completely believable that she was the mother of this child.
Sure. But that's another, I guess I would say, a question that pops into my mind is why some of these Episcopalian families in the South, and specifically in the South, who had such a problem with Catholicism, the papacy and, everything like that. And they would always turn over their wayward daughters that were impregnated by whomever to the Catholic Church. And it always seems to me like they wanted to give over their failures because they knew that the Catholics had an out. And so because they had failed in their own religion, they could turn them over to another one that was still Christian, and they could do whatever they want, and they would be still accepted into the kingdom of heaven as long as they, lived out the rest of their life as a nun. And it happened a lot. And that seems to be what happened with
some conjecture there. Yeah. And again,
Adam is showing a bit of his papist colors here.
That's true. I am a...
But no, it is
Catholic to the bone.
No, but it is a conjecture that has tremendous merit to it. So,
and going back to Bridget Smith and her research, is looking at a picture now of the head marker for Medora Peters, and for some odd reason, the date of birth on the grave marker is 1865, when, based on the documentary evidence, Medora was born in 1864. So her conjecture is the tombstone was adjusted to try to hide the fact that those 9 months, or that, now we're looking more than 9 months, doesn't jive with that story, to try to protect the family from those interactions with Van Dorn.
Yeah, and to
hide the illegitimacy of that daughter. that
The-
child.
Providing
The photographic
pretty healthy
evidence.
padding there.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah.
But the photographic evidence of her tombstone is, I mean, it's obvious blast marks, chisel marks that you can see. I mean,
I don't know about that. It's a black and white photo.
I mean, if that is, I mean, we would have to go to it and see it with our own peepers.
Oh.
But
Sounds like a Civil War field trip.
yeah, I think that's a Civil War field.
Memphis? All right, sign me up.
Let's go. Barbecue and gravestones.
Barbecues,
And the
blues, and
There we go. But either way, like I said, that's just another, that's another, I guess you would say, branch to this messed up tree of General Van Dorn, is that even though after he died or was murdered, his spirit still caused problems.
Going back to One Last Time, Confederate Veteran magazine.
Oh!
Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
You're very welcome, because I know this is truly unbiased.
Our third installment.
A wonderful periodical.
Fellow officers continued to say that the assassin recovered his confiscated plantation and Negroes, but lived in mortal fear of assassination until he died. So again, I want to take it back to the fact that he may have, slim possibility, who knows, but he may have killed Earl Van Dorn to prove his loyalty to the Union, so that after the war he could easily receive his property back. And to add some ammunition to that, in the 1867-68 Supreme Court Senate hearings, he's actually listed by name as claiming property post-war that was confiscated by the federal government. Now, not property, but a large number of cotton bales as part of a large legal battle with the federal government on reclaiming property, all based on his loyalty. This was based on those 1863, 1864 acts of confiscation. They pretty much said if you were loyal to the Union, you'd be due back what was due to you if we confiscated property. And that's what he's claiming after the war. So was he proclaiming loyalty being from Tennessee, or who knows what? But sometimes that history does appear to line up, or the speculation does.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess you would say conspiratorial if it were that.
Everything's a magic bullet.
Yeah, no shit. But it seems to me that there were, as Walter says in The Big Lebowski, a lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have yous. But there are.
Hey, by the way, this isn't Vietnam.
Yeah, this isn't Nam, Smokey. And that's exactly right. That's exactly right. He literally, this isn't Nam, Smokey. Dr. Peters had to do what he had to do. And, being the age of 51 in the middle of a war, having at that point, I think he had 7 or 8 kids that, he's got to deal with. And if he's got real estate, he's got cotton bales, and I have a feeling that there were probably some contraband human beings that were offered back to him. So he had 9 kids that he had to take care of. And you're going to do whatever you can as a parent to take care of your kids. And especially if one of them has been possibly defiled by the human being you just killed, either through tradecraft or through whatever other means that they had to die. He had to do what he had to do either way. So doing what he did, living after the war, possibly in fear. And from what I've read, that the Texans, the 3rd Texas Cavalry, those guys hunted him
through the war right after the murder.
They were one of those regiments that formed during that time when Van Dorn was in Texas.
He was like the father of that regiment. And so his murder, those guys literally, in the sources I've read, they were pissed that somebody had taken him from them. And, the things that all of us have researched and read about him is that, he might have been a rake, he might have been an asshole, he might have been a poor general, but he was dashing. The guy cut a fucking figure. I mean, he had a cape, he had a sombrero. I mean, the guy was a baller. I mean, he really was. But, sometimes that kind of activity and that kind of attitude catches you a lead ball in the back of the head or in the left side of the head, depending on
above the ear.
Yeah, above the ear.
Convulsively.
Due to a convulsive jerk.
Convulsive jerks.
An unfortunate convulsive jerk.
Yeah, at the last minute.
Unfortunate.
That one jerk makes you look like a coward.
Exactly. I mean, come on.
Exactly. I mean, so what are you going to do? But that's
impulsive jerk.
Impulsive jerk. Exactly. So, I mean, that's where we are. And I guess that might be where we leave it with General Earl Van Dorn. Earl Buck Van Dorn, Major General, Brigadier General. He was a wild man. He did what he did. And
in modern day parlance, he would be a pipe layer. A baller. I thought that's what we'd agree.
Yeah, he was a baller. He was. Yeah, and like we go back to the other episode.
Buck was
may not be a historical term, but I think
Buck
we agree.
The baller.
Buck the baller. Buck the baller. Everybody loved him except for the writers who and the journalists who he kept out of his camps, and he was one of the
those ugly husbands.
Yep, ugly husbands.
All of them.
And nerds. But he literally he did a lot of different things in a sense that he kept the press out of his movements, which finally the Confederacy lay in the war, but Union commanders and officers at around the same time don't let people write newspaper reports about where the fuck you are. And he pissed them off. So you get the instance at the end of his life where the Atlanta Confederate, a paper, wrote about old Buck Van Dorn, and they wrote, Van Dorn has been recognized for years as a rake, a most wicked libertine, and most especially of late. If he had led a virtuous life, he would not have died unwept, unhonored, and unsung. Think of the universal respect paid to the lamented Jackson. The whole country is filled with mourning and tears at his death, while no man expresses even a regret at the fate of Van Dorn. He is a striking difference between sin and righteousness, between the devotion of a man's life to the most infamous and debasing of all human vices and the most commendable and elevating of Christian virtues. The country has sustained no loss in the death of Van Dorn. It is a happy riddance. He was unfit to live, let alone having charge of such important trusts as he had. So there you go. That is the life and death of General Earl Van Dorn summed up in one paragraph. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for listening again to Civil Weird. And some of our, I guess you would say, our sources for the episode are Robert G. Hartgee, Van Dorn, The Life and Times of a Confederate General.
We also want to give a shout out to Bridget Smith, who wrote Where Elephants Fought.
Very good book. Very good novel. True crime in the Civil War, cases of murder, treason, counterfeiting, massacre, plunder, and abuse. by Tobin T. Book, Buhk. And as another shout out, we would like to say thank you so much to Eli Shermer, our editor, who does everything he possibly can to put together these episodes and make us sound like we're not idiots.
I'd also like to have an additional thanks to Matt Atkinson, ranger with the National Park Service at Gettysburg, and it's, at least for us, he was an additional source too. He had a fine video on YouTube on the life and times of Earl Van Dorn, and it was extremely helpful.
Yeah,
so
very good. And again, thank you to Aaron at Ford Gettysburg for his support. And we look forward to our next episode and talking to you guys again. So thanks, everybody. And we'll see you soon here on Civil Weird. Bye, everybody.
Bye.